All right, let's get started. Hello everybody, welcome back. We're gonna get started with the rise of industry-specific VC. We have two amazing panelists with us today, Jackson and Morgan. They'll give the introduction shortly. So, hi everyone, I'm Preet. I'm a second-year undergraduate at the Wharton School of Business, University of Pennsylvania, pursuing a dual degree. My first degree is Bachelor of Arts in Cognitive Science, and my second one is Bachelor of Science in Corporate Finance. And very excited to be here and love to have introductions of Jackson and Morgan. How about we go with Morgan first?
Yeah, thank you, Preet, and thank you to ASELxPenn and everyone else for having me here. Really excited to be here to talk today about what we do here at NightDragon. As Preet mentioned, I'm Morgan Kyauk. I'm a managing director here at NightDragon. NightDragon is an industry-specific VC. We focus on an industry that we call CSSP. That stands for cybersecurity, safety, physical and national security, and privacy. I've been investing with NightDragon for the past 3 years, but I've spent the prior 2 decades within the cybersecurity industry. Most recently, I was leading corporate development and M&A at a cybersecurity company called FireEye. I joined them right around the time they're about 40 million in revenue. Worked with the CEO there, the head of business development there, to grow the business to $1 billion business over time. Took the company public along the way. Also did a bunch of transformative acquisitions. Prior to FireEye, I spent time in corp dev leadership roles at companies like Dropbox, Juniper Networks, and HP, all primarily focused on cyber. And then prior to that, I was an M&A banker within Merrill Lynch's technology group.
Thank you very much. We're very excited to have you here.
Shall I jump in here, Preet?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Jackson Vaughan here, Konvoy Ventures. Really excited to be, having this conversation with both of you and with the whole audience as well. Konvoy is another industry-focused fund. We focus on the gaming industry, video gaming. We launched about 3-4 years ago. We're currently on Fund 3. We are an early stage fund, so we focus on seed and Series A opportunities, specifically within the gaming space. And more specifically, we actually just focus on platforms and technologies within gaming. We don't actually invest in content studios, studios that are building individual games. And my background before this, I was a software developer at IBM within their Watson group, focusing on AI and ML applications for Fortune 500 companies. But yeah, very excited to be focused here on the gaming space and having this conversation with all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jackson. We're very glad to have you. Two amazing panelists with us today. My first question to you guys is basically, if you can tell us more about your personal background and how you navigated into the VC industry. I think Morgan, you mentioned you were at Merrill Lynch, and then how did you did you always have this idea of being into VC, or was it something that you gradually got into over time?
Yeah. One of the things you've noticed in my background is it's primarily been in M&A, not on the investing side. So I started out my career in investment banking within the M&A group at Merrill, and through that experience, learned a lot about what it took to execute transactions. Began getting more and more interested on the strategy side of things, which is why I made that jump over to corporate development. HP was actually a long-standing Merrill Lynch client, and I ended up joining their corporate development organization. And one of the things that drew me to corp dev was that you were getting exposed to a lot of different aspects of a business, right? Not only are you executing the deal, the acquisition itself, but you're really thinking hard about the strategy, both organic and inorganic strategy of a business. You're getting to know the companies within the space and the innovation taking flight within these certain categories, getting close to the management teams of those companies and really understanding what drives success in one company versus another. And then ultimately, once you do conduct that acquisition, you're deeply involved in the operations of integrating that acquisition, right? So that whole life cycle for me was super compelling, which is why once I made that move into corp dev at HP, I decided to stick around in that function.
Yeah.
And did the exact same thing at Juniper, and then Dropbox, and then ultimately FireEye. but during that whole cycle, when I made those different career decisions, one of the things that also stuck with me was the sector I was operating in cybersecurity. I mean, one thing that I found in the space was that as I began to develop my network in the category, as I began to really understand, what made successful business within the space, I saw that I could apply that in an investing role longer term. And so, it wasn't necessarily I was always targeting to become a venture capitalist, move over to the investing side. I felt like corporate development as a function is something that obviously is very impactful within organizations. You do very similar
Absolutely.
things in terms of sourcing
Hmm.
acquisitions, thinking about market trends, getting to know management teams. But one of the things that I saw within cyber, and we could talk a little bit more about why we feel like at NightDragon we have a distinct advantage being a sector specific VC, is that within our market there's this dynamic where you have a massive market opportunity because of the major changes going on within technology, but you also
Hmm.
have this impact of the threat. The fact that cyber attackers, their methodologies are constantly changing, they're becoming much more sophisticated, and it's creating this unfair fight within this market where, if you're a large enterprise, if you're a chief information security officer expected to defend your organization against the cyber army of Russia, it's not fair, right? And so I think one of the reasons why I ultimately made that move to venture was that, in addition to being able to help think about market trends and pick companies that will eventually be winners from a strategy standpoint, corporate strategy standpoint, I wanted to increase that breadth of the types of companies we were looking at, right? So at FireEye, if you know FireEye's business, they primarily focus on network, email, and endpoint security. They had a bunch of cybersecurity services as well, but there were a bunch
Hmm.
of adjacent categories alongside of that I wasn't necessarily spending a lot of time around. And move into venture allowed me to be able to experience that breadth, think about other market segments that I wouldn't necessarily get exposure to at FireEye, and then begin to place bets in those categories. And so ultimately made that move over. I mean, a big piece of it was also the team too. So
Right.
NightDragon's a little bit of a unique situation. So we are on our fund two, so it's still an early
Hmm.
fund as well. But I had joined on the ground floor back with the two other partners here, Dave DeWalt and Ken Gonzalez. Dave was the CEO at FireEye. Ken led business
Hmm.
development at FireEye. So I worked very closely with those two guys, and the goal was to start something called NightDragon, which was a very unique strategy in the market, focused on late stage and growth stage companies, but bringing the
Right.
domain experience, the operational expertise of CSSP. We'll talk a
Hmm.
little bit more about what we do for our companies, but I mean, it was really that drew me to that role, the ability to work with those guys again, build something from the ground up, build something that's unique, leveraging the operating experience that we bring. And then my earlier point around being able to explore other areas outside of where your company operates to be able to address this bigger market opportunity that's arising that I described.
Absolutely, Morgan. Thank you so much for that. I think that definitely makes sense. I can see your whole trajectory as you were explaining. I was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. The whole journey definitely makes sense. I'm very excited. It must be very exciting to like work with the same partners that you work with at Fire AI and starting the new fund and basically investing in all of these new companies. I think that
Yeah.
definitely makes sense. Jackson, I would love to have know more about your story as well.
Yeah, sure, sure. No, I think these are always really interesting because I think they highlight sort of how varied the path to venture is.
Hmm.
There's so many different backgrounds and so many different paths, and mine's definitely different as well. I also did not expect necessarily to go into venture, uh,
Hmm.
but I played a lot of video games when I was younger, and so that was initial interest there for me. And I actually played a lot with my partners now, so we were childhood friends, and they're actually brothers, so they've obviously known each other for their whole lives.
Wow. Yeah.
But fast forward to professional life, was working in New York as a software developer, and wanted to do something entrepreneurial. Had kind of dabbled a little bit in that in undergrad and high school as well, which was interesting. Nothing
Hmm.
obviously took off, but it was all great learning experiences. But always had entrepreneurial interests, and wanted to do something within gaming. So started talking to a lot of founders to understand, what people were building. Started talking to early capital providers as well. A mix of angels, former gaming founders who had, built successful companies and wanted to continue supporting the industry, and also other venture capitalists. And so we started really as a group of scouts for other VC firms. And then we eventually grew that to, sort of a deal sourcing network. And then we decided to launch what we viewed as our MVP fund for our thesis, which was, over the course of a year of doing this sourcing, we developed this specific thesis that we felt was underserved at the early stage, which is what I was talking about before: platforms, technologies, infrastructure for the gaming space, more so than, content investments. And with that, with that first MVP fund, we hit initial traction there, and that's how we kind of got started and how I got into it. But wasn't expecting to be a VC. I think, if I probably would have gone down, continued down the technical path, and maybe hopefully have been a CTO of some company at some point. I think would have been the trajectory. But very happy with the move over here. I mean, venture is so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very happy for that. As a student myself, like I want to be an entrepreneur. I started two companies back in India, and yes, I'm starting to have a new venture here as well in the US. So this is very exciting to hear. Like, you were a software engineer and then you transfer into VC as an entrepreneur. I really love that story. I basically want to ask you then more about your journey, especially like why the gaming industry. I know you mentioned like in childhood you played a lot of games, and was it like what was your basically motivation to like just be an industry specific VC? And after you started as an industry specific VC at Konvoy, how have you seen the difference between like a general VC and the industry specific one? What are the advantages that you guys are experiencing right now?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I'm very interested to hear how Morgan answers this as well. I think there's kind of two ways to break it up from my perspective. One is why focus on a specific industry at all, and then two, why gaming. So I'll answer why gaming first for me. One, personal interest is there, right? But then I think that has over time really flown into passion for the business of gaming, which I think is really quite interesting and intricate. And it's this mix of art and technology, because all games most games, a lot of games are storytelling, right? And now you've got multiplayer, and there's a whole mix there. And you can kind of go back and forth on the balance between art and technology, but there is always going to be that mix, which makes it just an interesting product to put out in the world. And then the industry of gaming is quite massive. It's a $200 billion industry today. It's growing 13-14% annually. And we actually view that a lot of other industries are coming to gaming in a sense where there's a lot of interaction there. And that's just because the engagement level within gaming is so high. People spend on average, the average gamer in the US is spending, an hour 20 a day playing games. Compare that to Netflix, which I think is like 25 to 30 minutes or so. So like there's really high engagement within gaming. So I think like those are the reasons why gaming is such an interesting industry for me personally. And then, why have an industry focused fund? I think you can view it kind of similar to, there's that quote from, I think it's Mark Andreessen who talks about, bundling and unbundling. Sort of all innovation is a mixture of that. And I think an industry focused fund is exactly that. It's unbundling and focusing on a specific industry. And I think there's a few key benefits there. One is really the expertise you build over time just by focusing on one area. And then there's the network effects that happen with that, right? So you build a network of industry people, you build a network of founders, and you build a network of advisors and other experts who really understand the industry. And I think that creates this positive cycle or flywheel where you get better deal flow because you're focused on that industry. And then you hopefully make good decisions on those opportunities, right? And that will beget even more positive deal flow, and you'll be talking to the right people all the time.
Right.
I think like those there's just this really strong positive flywheel network effect that happens, that we've honestly just been starting to tap into, but it's been really quite wonderful.
No, that definitely makes sense. I in childhood didn't play that many games, but I really feel recently like being like, excited about like the gaming industry. I recently talked to Raji, the former like CEO and president of Nintendo, and like after like talking to him, like he told me so much about like how like gaming like it basically develops your cognitive skills as well. And, like there are so many positive aspects of gaming that I never knew about. And I think like Gen Z and especially like we as parents will be like very mindful of these things. So I think the gaming industry is only going to boom. Coming down the line. So I think that's a really exciting industry to be in. And Morgan, I wanted to ask you, like you talked about CSSP, if you can explain more about like what that stands for and like why be an industry specific VC, especially in the field of CSSP.
Yeah, no, sure thing. And that's a great story, Jackson. I mean, I think if you were to ask me when I started out my career, if I could focus on an industry, it definitely would have been gaming. I mean, obviously, spent my early years as a gamer as well, but got drawn into cyber, to answer your question, primarily because of that dynamic I described earlier. It's just this
Mm-hmm.
amazing intersection of market and mission, right? Market from the perspective of the fact that cybersecurity has become relevant to every single industry out there. It's no longer its own silo. If you're doing anything, if you're doing gaming, if you're writing software, if you're operating a retail organization, you have to think about cybersecurity. And so, because of that
Absolutely.
pervasiveness, there's a massive market opportunity attached to it. And then the other angle I mentioned was mission. The fact that,
Mm-hmm.
and I described this dynamic earlier, we are in an unfair match if you think about the types of attackers out there, their motivations, the resources that they have. Cyber has become much more relevant to any geopolitical event out there as well. So, 10 years ago, we probably had 5 countries out there with offensive cyber capabilities. Now that number's in the hundreds. So it's
Mm-hmm.
guaranteed whenever there's geopolitical tension, there's going to be a cybersecurity component to it. We're
Mm-hmm.
seeing this in Eastern Europe today. We're seeing this in the South China Sea today. And so not only will they be targeting public and government organizations, they also target private commercial organizations. They're launching ransomware attacks against hospitals and cities and even schools. And it's a little bit of an unfair fight, but that's what from our perspective, our team. That's why we all get up in the morning. We want to go identify the companies that are helping to close this gap between offense and defense that we like to call. So that's part of the reason why I'm passionate about this sector, why I feel
Mm-hmm.
like CSSP is so compelling. And to answer your first question, CSSP, that stands for Cybersecurity, Safety, Physical and National Security and Privacy. And so when we think about our mandate, it's not primarily cybersecurity in the sense of your antivirus software. We do look at those types of spaces, but cybersecurity, as I mentioned, has become much more relevant to areas of national security and privacy and even physical safety. And for that reason, we're
Right.
seeing a lot of great intersections across those verticals.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part of your question was really around the advantages that we have with our sector focus. And to Jackson's point, I would wholeheartedly agree that bringing that domain experience, especially within the CSSP sector, has very unique advantages in the way we work with our portfolio companies. So as I mentioned before, we focus on late stage companies, right? So these are companies
Mm-hmm.
that have found product market fit, they've created a repeatable business model, and they're addressing a large market opportunity. And
Mm-hmm.
they're at the point in their life cycle where they're looking to grow and scale, right? So we have grown businesses in this space before as operators. Dave's role as CEO of FireEye, but before that, he was the CEO of McAfee and then ended up selling
Mm-hmm.
McAfee to Intel for, I think, almost $8 billion. And then before that, he was the CEO of Documentum and almost sold Documentum to EMC for nearly $2 billion. Ken has led BD at McAfee, FireEye, Civil Systems. I've led corporate development, as I described. So when we think about our operating experience, it's really been about helping our
Mm-hmm.
companies with organic and inorganic growth initiatives. And so what we do here at NightDragon is we have a value-added platform that we've created, leveraging our operating experience, building companies in this space, and helping them tackle go-to-market hurdles that they might encounter. And I think that's a very unique value proposition, but also something
Absolutely.
that resonates highly with the market out there. One thing that I'd also point out around this concept of being industry specific is that it's my thesis and bet that more and more venture funds are going to go in this direction because capital is abundant, right? And at this point, if you're a business that's performing well, you're going to have access to a variety of sources of capital, and the ones that you're going to end up picking are the ones that could add value as investors, and the ones that could
Of
add
course.
value are the ones that bring that domain experience, the operating
Mm-hmm.
expertise, the subject matter expertise. And so I think you'll certainly start seeing more and more of that over time. We see it within the cyber industry because
Mm-hmm.
cyber itself has a market dynamic that's so unique. That sector focus is something that helps investors differentiate themselves.
No, absolutely. That totally makes sense, Morgan. Especially when you mentioned, like, even in terms of geopolitical tension, like, as like companies increase in size, or basically you mentioned, like, like more than 100 countries at the total risk of, like, cybersecurity concerns. I totally get that. So I wanted to ask you basically then, how has that factored into the resiliency that you might have seen by the industry during the times of COVID, especially, like, how has the industry changed from the pre-pandemic levels to like post-pandemic levels right now?
Yeah. I mean, COVID was uh, for many industries a significant accelerant, right? One thing that you
Mm-hmm.
saw was a mass acceleration of digital transformation.
Absolutely,
I think
yes.
one of the banking executives had said that they had fit 10 years of digital acceleration into 2, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the with that, whenever you think about cyber as a sector, whenever you have major technology changes, it opens up a
Mm-hmm.
new cyber market. So COVID, what had occurred was that pre-COVID, typically you had all your employees in a physical office somewhere. That physical office was protected by network security devices like a firewall
Mm-hmm.
or intrusion detection system, a web gateway. And then when COVID hit, all your employees began working remotely. They worked from home, they worked all over the place. And because of that, the security model couldn't keep up. And so what
Right.
happened was new types of security models were adopted. The concept of cloud delivered security, secure access service edge, which are unique markets that have been created since then. There's a couple public companies out there like a Cloudflare and a Zscaler doing extremely well, capitalizing on
Yeah.
this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so what it's really done is completely change the way we think about security. We think about securing our employees and our data. And I think one thing we're also seeing is because employees are now dispersed in a variety of different locations, that also caused an acceleration of the threat. If you look at the ransomware numbers in terms of numbers of attacks that have occurred over the past couple of years, I mean, they've nearly doubled since the pre-COVID days. And so as we become more digital, the cybersecurity risk, the cybersecurity threats that we face will become more extreme. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what we're certainly seeing in the market today. So to your point about resiliency, that's certainly something that occurred during COVID. Coming out of COVID, potentially in a contractionary environment as we
Right.
teeter on a recession, I think there's certainly going to be some budgetary pressure on cyber as a sector. But for the
Mm-hmm.
most part, because cybersecurity is so critical to any organization, you not only experience a direct impact of the direct economic impact of a breach, but any breach causes adverse impact to your brand, to your trust, to loyalty of an organization, to your reputation.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Cybersecurity budgets do also are highly resilient in this sector. You go speak with any chief information security officer, budgets are
Mm-hmm.
continuing to grow in this environment.
Of
So,
course.
so that's what we're seeing in the market so far, and
Mm-hmm.
which makes it a very interesting time for us to be deploying capital into the sector, and the fundamentals in the sector continue to remain very sound, and we're excited about being able to work with the next generation of market leaders in the category.
Absolutely, Morgan. Thank you so much for that. Yes, I think I read a PitchBook article mentioning the rise of cybersecurity startups right now, especially during COVID, and the integration of like AI, ML, especially like in cybersecurity right now. So I think, yeah, definitely cybersecurity is definitely going to be one of the biggest industries to work with,
Yeah.
um, especially with the rise of AI and ML for sure. Jackson, like I think you might also be seeing similar. My speculation is you might also be seeing like similar resiliency because especially like, a lot of teenagers being at home, you must have seen a boom in the gaming industry for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, COVID, unfortunately, was it's an event that happened, and it's terrible, overall. But for the gaming industry, it was a huge boom. I think we saw 25% annual growth in 2020, and some of that carried over in 2021. We're actually seeing that a lot of the new gamers, right, that came to started playing games and hadn't before, are actually sticking around. So that's a good sign for the industry, even as things start to open up. But we've also, considering the, as Morgan mentioned, economic concerns at the moment from a macro level, we've actually done a few studies on, what is the resiliency of gaming in macroeconomic downturns, and it is exactly that, right? It's resilient. It's not. It still is affected, of course, right, as any industry is, but it actually is resilient. I think. I don't have the exact numbers, but gamer playtime on a weekly basis, from 2007 to 2009, actually increased, right? So it's something that gamers and players, they retreat to playing games when they're stressed, when they're faced with hardship. There's a whole bunch of things, and it's also a very cheap form of entertainment on a dollar to time spent basis, right? You can purchase. There's a number of free to play games, right? That are out there, especially on mobile. But most of the major franchises today are free to play standard, right? And that business model is just supported by, you have a whole host of players that support and facilitate the network effect that brings in whales, right? These whales spend a lot of money, and that supports the overall business model for the game. But that means that a lot of players can play for free, right? Many of those choose to purchase in-app purchases, in-game items, things of that nature, right? And that flows to the economy of the game. But it actually is a cheaper option. So what you typically see is the average revenue per users go down a little bit, but players don't leave, right? So there's an element of, there will be some small hardship that's experienced across the gaming industry through economic recessions and downturns, but it's not sustained over time. Yeah, so it's somewhat similar, but for different reasons, I think, as the security sector.
So that makes sense. And I think with the rise of NFTs, especially, you might also be seeing more in-game purchases. I think recently, I think it was Fortnite that introduced, it was trying to introduce, I think, NFTs inside, and more tokens, more avatars inside the game. So I think that might also definitely help the gaming industry basically get its boom for that part. In the interest of time, basically, I wanted to move a little bit quicker. So I wanted to ask you more. This is a question for Jackson. As students right now, for example, students like my age, or maybe college students right out of grad school, undergrad, if we want to get into VC industry, what should we do right now in college? And if you're out just minted right now, what should we do right now in order to understand that experience and get that, maybe go through the operational route, or understand more about directly getting into VC?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have a few recommendations there. One, probably top one, is John Gannon's blog. So there's this person, John Gannon, he puts out a blog, and it's weekly, VC jobs, right? I think that's one of the best resources, and it's paid. So as a VC, you pay for posting your job there. So there's high intent, right, on the VC side in terms of people searching for someone to hire. So I think that's a really great spot. I would talk to VCs, talk to as many as you can. I would do cold outreach on LinkedIn, on Twitter, because VCs are on Twitter as well. But I think there's an element of, and this is everything, it's a numbers game. So get your name out there, talk to as many people as you can. And then I think also try to develop your own thesis on a given industry. If you want to get into the gaming space, start thinking about ideas within gaming, and a thesis that you think, what company should exist. Also, I think you can also act as the VC before actually becoming a VC, and that's actually going to get your way there. So act as a scout, for example. Go out and talk to a bunch of startups and figure out the top ones, and put together a one-pager on it and send those to the VCs that you'd like to work at. And I think there's this real element of, this person is putting in the work. They actually have good ideas, and they're bringing me an opportunity that is, really quite compelling. If you can do that all before, even having a real interview, I think you're putting your best foot forward. So I don't know, a few recommendations there, but I think just you kind of have to hit the pavement for sure.
No, yeah, that definitely rings a bell for me, especially. I interned at a VC firm last summer, and I think like a lot of recommendations resound, especially right now. Also, like I think one of the biggest things is like getting your network inside VC, because like you need to know a lot of people inside like the founding, especially like if you're in the gaming industry, know a lot of gamers and like what's happening in the industry to have like constant knowledge. I think it's a very challenging task, but also very exciting at the same time. So I think our audience would definitely be interested in VC. Morgan, if you have anything to add to that, I'd love to hear.
No, no, not necessarily. I would say that the point that Jackson made on developing or showing some general interest in a specific industry is important, and having an opinion on where that industry is going and which companies might capitalize on those trends. I think it not only signals your ability to pick up an industry very quickly, but also it shows insight that you can bring to the team, the value that you can bring to the team. Which is important. We are a late stage focused fund. So typically at the junior level, we do like to hire folks with a financial background. So typically the investment banking or private equity route. But I think I completely agree. Further along in your careers, especially if we're hiring at a more senior level, the network is important. The industry knowledge is important, and really being able to show that you have genuine interest, in our case, in cyber.
Absolutely. I hope the audience was taking notes for that. Okay, so in the interest of time, I think just one last question. It's a very short one. I wanted to ask you, what are you excited about for next year? Maybe like or the next couple of years. What's one piece of technology that you would like to, the audience to know about, and maybe like as students be excited for?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to go first on that one. So when we think about compelling areas for cyber to invest in, we always look to what's going on the technology side. So massive technology changes always lead to cybersecurity opportunities. I think, if you asked me 6 months ago, I probably would have said Web3 and some of the things going on there in terms of the cybersecurity activity. I mean, one thing we've seen is that there have been massive hacks going on in that space on a weekly basis. And the cybersecurity fundamentals within that industry are lacking. And so there are really interesting companies that are innovating in that sector. I think we're paying close attention to them, and I think a new cybersecurity model will develop over time. Now, with some of the recent developments in the sector, it's probably going to take a while before people begin to dive back in. But once you begin to establish the regulatory framework within that sector, you will begin to see cybersecurity models also develop. And what becomes even more interesting for me, where I feel like this will become a multi-billion-dollar opportunity, is when that cybersecurity model enables your traditional Web2 legacy type organizations to participate in Web3, right? That's what's lacking right now, is that you have these two individual silos getting created, but nothing's connecting the two environments. And so that is certainly an area that we're paying close attention to, where we think some interesting companies will come up over time. It'll take some time now, given recent developments, but it's an interesting category for us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Morgan, for that. Jackson, I would love to hear your answer too.
Yeah, I'll try to go quick here. I mean, there's a lot of different areas within gaming that I'm interested in. I think I already talked about sort of intersection of gaming and other industries. And that's definitely one. Kind of maybe just to bring one up that's I think really fun. If the audience knows brain machine interfaces, BMI or BCI. So that's one area that's kind of gotten a lot of news in the past, I would say 5 years or so. Really interesting area. I mean, it's essentially mind control, right? You think about something and there's software that's, being able to read brain signals. But one area I'm really interested in is sort of the inverse of that, is how do we stimulate the brain when something's not necessarily there, right? Or how do we stimulate our senses when something isn't there? And so I think the best application for this within gaming would be within virtual reality. when, let's say, there's an item, an object like a ball or something. How do you know you're holding the ball, right? You see it, but you don't have any physical feedback on that. And so we're looking at, I think the term is neurostimulation, basically. So how do you fake basically that you're holding something, or you're pushing against a wall or something of that nature? So that's something that I think is going to be really critical for a more immersive experience within virtual reality, and it's something that I'm quite excited about.
Absolutely, that makes me very excited. Yeah, I'm excited about the Meta Quest 2. I think they just released, Facebook just released the new VR headsets, and I was planning to buy those, and I was like excited for Apple to release their VR headset next year. So yeah, definitely there are a lot of things to look forward to in the gaming industry for sure. I think we have reached our time limit for that. So again, thank you so much, Jackson and Morgan. I think I'm sure our audience has had a great time with you guys. Amazing answers. Thank you so much. I learned so much from you all. I'm very stimulated right now, just like, understanding more about the cybersecurity space in the gaming industry. Again, thank you so much for talking to us today, and hope you have a great time.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jackson. Bye.
Thanks, Morgan. Thanks, Preet.